Welcome to Work Comp Talk, a podcast dedicated to all of the injured workers here in the state of California. My name is Carmen, your host, and joining me is my co-host, Bilal Kassim, managing attorney here at Pacific Workers, the Lawyers for Injured Workers, who also happen to be our sponsors for the podcast. And today's topic, we are going to dive straight into. It's a topic that we haven't really discussed in the past, and it also circles back to what are the most common injuries that we see here in workers' comp? And obviously, given that you have a practice and that you have thousands of clients, we do see trends. There's times where we see certain industries that have certain injuries, and what better than to tackle that subject today, which is common construction injuries. I want to dive into this, but first I would like to ask you, what are the most common injuries you see from construction workers?
You kind of hit it on the head a little bit. There is some seasonality to it.
Interesting.
Meaning, for example, right, like you see less of the concrete guys, the masons out there doing their work during the rainy season because you can't pour foundation when it's raining, right? So, some people have their projects delayed and things like that. Carpentry and other projects, that's kind of year round, but there is some seasonality to the type of work and the type of injuries that you see as well, just even within that subset. So generally, I think for the most part with construction injuries, you see, I guess there are injuries that are a direct result of that person's work, meaning, someone was operating a power tool malfunction, they hurt themselves. You see a lot of falls. You see a lot of, lifting type injuries. Someone's, lifting a bag of concrete, or they're lifting up a huge beam and they hurt their back, things like that. Those are all kind of, I call them direct injuries because it's the person that's doing that thing and they're the ones that get hurt.
Right.
You also see a lot of indirect injuries, and those are the injuries that are due to someone else doing something or something else happening on the job site, and that ends up causing an injury. A very common one we see is electrocution injuries.
Yikes.
People are supposed to put lockout, tagout, system in place so that when they're working on electrical stuff or whatever, they're using tools and whatnot, they know tools broken, or they know, electric panels off or something like that. And when there's multiple people on the job site at the same time, there's sometimes a lack of communication. You can have multiple subcontractors. You can have the electrician at the same time you have the framers, or, you could have the plumber there at the same time as the framers, or whatever combination of it you can think of, and everyone's there and they're working with their own team.
Right.
And so a lot of times there's things that happen through, inadvertence. It's not intentional, but, injuries that occur, like I said, electrocution injuries, people falling through boarded up sections of a construction project because,
yikes,
one team knew that hole was there, but the other person didn't, and they step on it and then, fall in. It's not properly barricaded, things like that. So it just depends, but there's a lot of physical injuries,
Right. I mean, I'm assuming we are expecting those physical injuries, but I'm glad that you mentioned that it's a seasonal type of stuff. I can totally see heat, affecting in a way, shape, or form. For example, if there's construction workers and they're building houses and they're out in the sun, the last thing they want to do is have gloves on and have their hands all sweaty. And because they're sweating, things slip, if they're using power tools. And I can totally also see that happening during rainy seasons. You're mentioning there's certain trades that won't work during the rainy season, but carpentry for once will. It's colder, they have heavier jackets on, and sometimes things can get in the way. I've heard people actually get gloves caught into machines. I've heard people that, accidents happen. And I'm glad you brought that up, because sometimes I guess we don't realize that these scenarios can actually happen. And wake up, guys. If you guys are watching this video or listening to the podcast, just keep this in mind that, even going up a ladder after coming outside from the wet floor, the wet cement, and then you climb up the ladder and your foot is wet, your shoes are wet, you're going to slip, you're going to fall. Like, it's all these things that we don't think about until it's too late. And we're bringing this subject to bring awareness to those that do work in construction. Heads up, these are the most common injuries. And though you might not think about it, like, oh, that doesn't happen all the time, what would be like the number one besides people getting electrocuted left and right? What else would be like another type of common injury in construction workers?
I mean, heavy lifting for sure. It's probably one of the most common. Falling objects. You know, if I'm working on the first floor of a building and someone's working on the third floor of the building and something falls on my head, you know, that's why you have to wear a hard hat. But
Heads up! I dropped my hammer.
At the same time, you know, a hard hat's not going to do much for a steel beam. You know, it's just it's too little. You know, but you see that a lot. You know, another common denominator I see, regardless of the type of injury, the injury is caused by taking shortcuts. You know, OSHA has safety guidelines in place for a reason, and some people take shortcuts, and some bosses think it's okay to tell their employees to take shortcuts. You know, if I'm supposed to be up on a 3-story roof and I'm supposed to have a harness, and my harness is torn or not working, and my boss tells me to get up there anyways, you know, there's a good chance I could fall off the roof and there's nothing there to catch me, and I'm really in some serious pain, you know?
Right.
But that's a pretty common denominator too. We see people being asked to do things that, quite frankly, they violate OSHA safety guidelines. So
right. And there's a ton of companies out there that obviously provide these types of jobs for construction workers. And it's also, I think, goes hand in hand when you're working with someone who's unlicensed or working under someone else's license and they have their own business. I think that's where you realize who really is taking the OSHA violations seriously, or the OSHA regulations, I should say.
You see it in pricing. If I go and I bid out a construction project with a general contractor and they come back and their price is like
way low,
like 60% less than everyone else's, and like 120% less than that one guy who threw that Hail Mary, you know, the guy who's just like, screw it, I'm going to give this super high, you know, price, and it's much lower than that. You know, there's probably there's a reason why they can afford to bid your project so low, and it's generally because they're not paying insurance, they're not bonded, they don't, you know, they don't have all these.
They take the shortcuts.
Yeah, they take the shortcuts, and it reflects in the type of labor they hire and their practices in business and all that other stuff.
So if you're planning on joining any construction company, make sure you look into all these red flags. At the end of the day, some of these companies, like you mentioned, are not covered with workers' compensation insurance, and you would hate to be in that type of situations.
Yeah.
But let's just say you're working for a construction company. They don't have a workers' comp insurance. You're shit out of luck. I mean, there's slight options with the state of California, but what would be that scenario?
So, yes. I mean, you can tip for the day. You can go on the Contractor State Licensing Board. Anyone who's a licensed contractor in the state of California, it doesn't matter what type of license it is. If it's a roofing license, it's plumbing, it's finished work, you know, concrete, framing, doesn't matter. They all have to report their work comp insurance coverage. So you can go look at the employer's name and you can find out whether or not they have work comp insurance. And some employers, like you said, will declare that they have 0 employees, and so they're exempt from carrying workers' comp insurance.
Right.
We see this a lot with construction contractors, general contractors, right? Because they claim all these people working for them are just subcontractors, not actual employees, despite them wearing company equipment and
the uniform
clothing and working there and getting
and
paid
driving their
hourly
vehicles
and all that stuff. So you see that a lot, unfortunately. There are some contractors that are, you know, they're good about that. They will have work comp insurance and coverage, and that's where you can find that info.
Okay.
If they don't and you get hurt, you can actually file what's called a UEF claim, an uninsured employer benefit trust fund case, and basically the state of California steps in for insurance purposes so that the injured worker is not screwed because their boss took a shortcut and didn't get insurance.
You brought up an important subject on this that I also wanted to kind of take back and dive a little bit into, since we are talking about the common injuries that you see in construction workers within the workers' compensation here in California. What happens when, for example, that person categorizes you as a subcontractor? Let's just say that they're not considering you an employer. They're considering you, an employee. They're considering you like, oh, you're just your own man, freelancer type of thing. You know, do you see that in some of the injuries you guys take with the law firm?
Yeah, all the time. Yeah, we see a lot. You know, people say, oh, well, you know, we're a general contractor, but you're just going to be doing framing for us. You're not going to be doing plumbing or anything else. So you're a subcontractor, right? And you have all your own tools and you're doing your own thing. And not so fast. You know, I think there's a lot of misclassification issues because of the expenses related to maintaining employment, providing benefits, paying payroll taxes, you know, the overhead associated with healthcare or PTO or sick time and all those things that a lot of construction companies don't want to deal with. And so you do see misclassification a lot. And ultimately, there's some case law in California, and recent change in statute a couple years ago that really define whether or not you're an employee or an independent contractor. And that test is basically like, are you doing what the core of the business is doing, and are you like free of their control or not? And that's it. If you're a framing company doing framing and you hire a framer and try and tell them they're an independent contractor, it's not going to fly. Same thing if you're a plumbing company. You say, oh, well, my field workers are just all independent contractors because they have their own tools, their own van, but they're doing plumbing and you're paying them by the hour and they're wearing your clothing and doing work on your jobs that you contracted for. Like, sorry, they're an employee. They're not an independent contractor.
That's crazy.
And we have to fight that battle a lot.
What does the outcome look like for that? Does it make it that much more difficult for the actual injured worker to kind of navigate those? Yeah,
it's a lot more time consuming. And again, if you're not, if you don't have work comp insurance, then there's no medical provider network of doctors that will take work comp, which means, in our particular practice, we have to find doctors that will take work comp. And we have great relationships to help establish that even for uninsured employers. But it slows the process down dramatically. It can really be a huge pain and take a long time to get someone going with their benefits and medical care.
That's great to know. So if you know someone that works in the construction industry, if you're a woman and your husband, brother, dad works in this industry, or you yourself work in the construction industry, you now know what are the most common injuries in workers' comp for that particular trade in construction. So think about it twice before you turn on the electricity or the power, you plug anything in. Make sure you double check that you're not going to get electrocuted, given the fact that that's one of the most common injuries. The falls, make sure you guys have a good grip and the ladder is set up straight, and just be aware of your surroundings, that there's no holes, there's no tools dropping on your head, and most importantly, be careful when you're lifting heavy stuff. Make sure to use the knees and not put all the strain in your back. A good belt, like the ones that the support belts in the back, would come in handy.
Yeah, I mean, like, no one's gonna wear a kidney belt on the construction site for sure. It's not like you're deadlifting, but I mean, that's one of the people's gripe with hard hats and stuff is the comfort, right? So people want to be comfortable out on the job site, and you can be comfortable, but you can be safe too. And I think just knowing your limitations and how much you can lift, asking for help where appropriate, ensuring that your boss is providing you at least the minimum required OSHA safety equipment. Especially if you're a roofer, for example, and you're up more than 2 stories, please make sure you're harnessed in. Make sure there's a detachment point on the roof that you can buckle up to.
You're harnessed in and you never attached it to
I mean, this is
anchor
with
points.
roofing. They put little clips in now on the peak of the roof where you can just clip in with your harness and move around and be completely safe. It's an absolute common practice these days, so there's no reason why you shouldn't be ignoring that stuff.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for this information. We hope you find value in it. We did share a couple of tips on it as well. Make sure you hit the subscribe button, the bell notification. That way, every time we submit a new episode or a new video onto our YouTube channel, you get first dibs and you get notified that we have new content waiting for you. And if you do already subscribe and follow us, we want to thank you so much. Make sure you guys check us out on the next episode. Thank you.